All right, everybody, how you doing? We're on to questions 23 to 33, which is passage 3 of the cram we did on Saturday. This is about the kind of legal customs implications in the United States for a particular sculpture being imported and how it was like a work of art, but it was made of like pieces of metal kind of stuck together. And so the US government at first recognized it not as a work of art, but rather as like an industrial good, and so there were different legal and tax implications. Anyway, question 23 is asking us, it's a typical sentence insert and delete question. It's asking, should we insert this sentence? So as always, before we read this sentence, we want to understand the context. So we start with a quote from the sculptor. "All my life, I have been seeking to capture the essence of flight." Okay, so basically the sculptor wants to represent flight. "Bird in Space," it's in italics, so it's a title, "is a work of abstract art. It is not a readily recognizable representation of the bird in its title, but rather a polished arc of bronze that calls to mind the animal's graceful airborne motion." So we start with how the sculptor wants to represent flight, and then we move to a description of Bird in Space, one of that sculptor's sculptures, okay, presumably. So let's look at the sentence. "More than any of Brancusi's other works, the 1926 sculpture Bird in Space manages to achieve that aim." Okay, so I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, okay, it could go here as a transition. Is it absolutely necessary? I'm not sure. As always, before I look at yes and no, I want to look at the second half of each answer choice. So does it help explain why the US government would eventually recognize Bird in Space as a work of art? No, right? It talks about how the sculpture managed to achieve that aim of representing flight. It doesn't talk about the US government at all, and it doesn't talk about why it counts as a work of art. Rather, it talks about its aim of representing flight. Get rid of A. Second one, does it provide an effective transition between the presentation of Brancusi's goal and the discussion of Bird in Space? Looks pretty good to me, right? First we have the goal, then we have a discussion of Bird in Space, which dominates the rest of the passage. C, does it present information about Bird in Space that is repeated later in the paragraph? It doesn't, okay? The rest of the paragraph kind of describes the physical structure, so I'm gonna get rid of that. And D, does it interrupt the explanation of the nature of abstract art? No, it doesn't. This is not a discussion of the nature of abstract art. Yes, it says that it's a work of abstract art, but we're not discussing the nature of abstract art, which would mean taking a look at maybe abstract expressionism and other like movements in the late 19th and early 20th century in the art world. But we're going to get rid of this. It's not factually true. So that means that B is our only answer. So it seems a little bit hard, but if we do back-end elimination, true or false, 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 true, this is the only one that can be correct. Number 24, pretty easy question, I think. So we know that ITS is possessive, so with its end tapering into points. So what end are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the end of the statue or the sculpture, right? So of here again shows possession. This is a possessive pronoun. Therefore, we can get rid of B. We can get rid of C, which by the way is always going to be wrong, and we can get rid of A. The only one that works is its. Yes, it changes end, apostrophe S into ends. That's okay as well. Again, D is our only option because it's the only one that fits with its. But if we think about it as well, this is not a possessive word. The ends of the sculpture do not possess anything. Rather, they are possessed by the sculpture itself, by it. 25. This is going to be a subject-verb agreement question. So the subject here is much, and then this is a prepositional phrase. So much appear or much appears. Right? Much appears. Much is singular. It's a pronoun, right? Which means it might be a little bit kind of confusing to your ear, which is why the SAT is choosing to test this. But the first thing we want to recognize is that it has to be much as the subject, not the rest of it. Much is singular, so much appears. We can get rid of A automatically. We might ask about B and C as well. These are also singular. Is appearing is awkward. We don't need to emphasize the fact that it's happening right now. Rather, this is just the way the sculpture looks in general when it was created and presumably today as well. So we don't need to emphasize the exact present moment. Get rid of B. Has appeared is also strange too. It suggests that it's like an action that has been going on and is now completed. This is not a completed action. Rather, we're just talking about the nature of the statue, the sculpture itself. So appears is going to be the most appropriate. If we take a look at number 26, this is probably the hardest question on this passage, in my opinion. We're going to take a look at the transition here. So we know then, at any rate, though, and therefore are all transitional phrases. So as always, we're going to look at the statement before and the statement after, see the relationship. So the statement before, again, is not this sentence, but the sentence before. So the sentence before, and really the discussion before, is about the like kind of the way the sculpture looks, like basically its artistic qualities, right? And then the final sentence says, more than just a visually arresting sculpture, Bird in Space was responsible for changing how the US government recognized art. So it kind of introduces this new idea, right? So our options are then, at any rate, therefore. At any rate, we can get rid of. At any rate is kind of like it's kind of like a poor man's nevertheless. It's awkward. Nevertheless means despite this previous fact, which is not going to be appropriate here. We can also get rid of therefore. I don't think the fact that something is a work of art automatically means that it changes the way the US government looks at art. So we can get rid of D. We can also get rid of A because of the word then. The word then kind of has two meanings. It's either chronological, first one thing, then another. That doesn't make sense here. Right, again, because when we describe the way that the sculpture looks, we're not talking about an event in time, rather we're just describing the sculpture, so we can get rid of then. And the other way we might look at then is kind of like therefore, if X, then Y, right? So for the same reason, that doesn't make sense. It's not like a cause and effect situation where if something is a work of art, therefore, then it is going to have implications on US customs law, right? So though is the only one that's left. It's kind of like highlighting a contrast, which is a little bit unusual because it's a new point, but it kind of makes sense, I think, because as we're going to see, the rest of the passage is kind of about the conflict between looking at this as a work of art and looking at it as an industrial product, and the two kind of conflicting viewpoints on it. So C is going to be our best answer here. Let's look at 27. Which choice gives a second supporting example that's most similar to the example already in the sentence? Well, this paragraph is kind of talking about how people didn't really consider it a work of art, right? It says many struggled to see it as a work of art at all. We have two examples. The first one says it looked like half an airplane propeller. Well, that's kind of describing it not as a work of art, but as an industrial object, as an airplane propeller. Now we want another example that shows that people did not see it as a work of art. So A, a tall, slender, highly polished object. Well, that could describe a work of art, but we're looking for something that is not a work of art. Get rid of A. B, another mocked it as an expensive potato masher. Again, this would be an industrial object, like a household tool or something, or maybe a professional kitchen tool. In any case, not a work of art, so I like B. C, a symbol of flight liberating man. That sounds like a work of art. Get rid of it. D, art critic stated that it had the suggestion of flight. Well, this is an art critic, and we're certainly not talking about an industrial good here. We're talking about an art critic saying that it suggested something, so we're going to get rid of that. Our best answer is going to be B. Right? It's another example of like a non-artistic item that it was likened to at first. Okay, 28. 28 is a comma question. Works of art could be imported to the United States duty-free. That is an independent clause. My subject is works, right? Works of art. And my verb is could be imported. There's no reason for me to ever put a single comma between a subject and a verb, right? I might put two commas if there's like an A positive or some other interrupter there, but I'm never going to put a single comma here, so I can get rid of C. D for the same reason, and then B is kind of like a random single dash just used as a distractor. We can get rid of this one, right? So we can get rid of A, we get rid of D. The best answer is going to be C, no punctuation needed. Let's look at 29 here. This is a pronoun question. So whenever we have a pronoun question, we want to look for the antecedent. What word does the pronoun refer to, right? So if I read this, works of art could be imported to the United States duty-free, but industrial materials were taxed at rates of up to 40% of their purchase value. The purchase value of what? Of industrial materials. So that's the antecedent of the pronoun. Notice this is plural from the S on the end of materials. So therefore, I can get rid of its, I can get rid of one's, I can get rid of his. These are all singular, right? Only A is a plural pronoun, and therefore it's right. Let's take a look at number 30 here. 30 is a vocabulary question. This is kind of a mix of tone and of meaning. Let's take a look at the sentence. Brancusi in turn sued the US government aiming to blank recognition of his sculpture as art. So because this has something to do with the meaning, right? We could look at this as a meaning question or a tone question, kind of both ways. It's kind of like on the boundary line. But if we look at it as a meaning question, one thing I like to do is ignore what's given and try to fill this in. So Brancusi sued the government aiming to something the recognition of his sculpture as art. So aiming to like achieve or something. It's a little bit awkward here, but achieve meaning he wants to like accomplish the fact that people will look at his sculpture as a work of art, not as an industrial good. So what works best there? So he's trying to like achieve this recognition, right? He's trying to, maybe we could say a better prediction would be gain this recognition. Okay, so is he trying to score the recognition? No, that's like an informal phrase, right? Obviously, if we're talking about a test score or like a basketball game or something, then score is not slang. But when we say, oh, I want to score tickets to the concert or something, right? That's like a slang term for gaining or acquiring. Get rid of A. Secure works well. This is a secondary definition. So the first definition of secure is like to make safe or something. If I secure someone into a car with a safety belt, for example. But secure can also mean to acquire, right? Or to gain. So it's a really good match for our prediction, gain. Land, it's kind of like A. I'm going to land tickets to the concert. That's a slang term. Gather up. This is like an awkward, wordy phrase that doesn't make sense because gather up really is only going to work with like physical things, right? I might gather up the crops or something when I'm harvesting them if I'm a farmer, right? I'm not going to gather up recognition. That doesn't make sense. It needs to be something tangible or physical. So A and C are slang. Gather up is awkward and it doesn't really fit because it needs to be a physical object. Secure works. It's the secondary definition. You can look it up. Number 31. This is a concision question. Now we know that concision is always the case on SAT writing questions, but sometimes it's directly what's targeted by the question. We can tell here because concision problems are like cockroaches. If you see one, there are going to be a lot more. So well-known and famous mean the same thing. Well-known and famous mean the same thing. Famously well-known means almost the same thing. It's a little bit different in meaning. We're not going to waste time taking a look at it, but famous on its own is going to do the job. This is the most concise. No need for both of those words. Notice as well, another sign of a concision question is it's in this kind of like inverted trapezoid or inverted triangle shape. And what they're trying to do is to get you to choose A or B without looking at all the answer choices, because sometimes it's when you finally read D that kind of like a light bulb goes off in your head and you realize, aha, this is a concision question. So D is going to be our best answer here. Let's take a look at number 32. After hearing a lineup of famous art critics testify to the aesthetic value and originality of non-representational art like Bird in Space. So this is like a long introductory phrase. The court's ruling. Okay, so this is a misplaced modifier, guys. These happen about once or twice per test. So the question is, who heard a lineup of experts, right? Well, the court heard, or maybe like the judge heard or the jury heard, right? So if I look here, the court's ruling didn't hear, right? The court's ruling didn't hear. Brancusi didn't hear, right? He's not the one making the decision in the courtroom. Rather, the court heard it, and then the court ruled in favor of Brancusi. So a classic misplaced modifier question. Let's take a look at number 3. The writer wants a conclusion that reiterates the main idea. What's the main idea? Well, basically that Bird in Space like changed customs law, specifically with regard to what counts as a work of art. So the decision meant that the public had finally come to recognize the artistic value of non-representational art. Wrong. This is not talking about a change in law. It's talking about the public's view. Moreover, non-representational art was something that's been going on way before Bird in Space. So if you know anything about art history, A is wrong as well. B, the decision was a great victory for art collectors, a major impediment to their ability to import artworks. I think this is too weirdly focused on art collectors. We're talking about the meaning of a work of art, not art collectors. You might want to keep it for now because it's semi-on topic, but it's not going to be our best answer. Let's look at C. The decision would forever broaden the range of art acknowledged by the US government. Like it so far, from then on, customs law would recognize both abstract and traditional works within the category of art. Looks beautiful. D. Concerning the value of abstract works, such as Bird in Space, would take many more years to be made in the court of public opinion, however. This is weird. After focusing on like how revolutionary Bird in Space is, it kind of like ends on a limitation. Also, the focus here is on public opinion, whereas we're not talking about public opinion, we're talking about the US government, or maybe, or US law, okay? Not the US public. So our best answer here is going to be C. All right, guys. Gonna come back with passage 4 soon.